Welcome, guys. I'm Jeremiah Owyang, your moderator, today at the think tank talking about the future of work hosted by Adobe. Today we have a wonderful session. We're all going to learn from each other around people, technology, and workplaces. We're going to have some lively debates. We're going to have some discussions. We're going to make some predictions about the future. And we'll take a few questions from the live stream. For anybody that's joining on the live stream, you could ask questions on the chat tool or fire off a few tweets at a hashtag Adobe TT, and we'll be listening in for those. Now, to kick things off, I'm Jeremiah Owyang, the founder of Crowd Companies, but I'd like the rest of the panel to introduce themselves. Matt, kick it off.
Matt Dorey, the CEO of Factory.
Kate Kendall, the founder and CEO of CloudPeeps.
John Perera, I run product strategy for Adobe's Document Cloud.
I'm Lepofsky. I'm Vice President and Principal Analyst at Constellation Research.
Navomita, Partner Site HR, Siteman Community.
I'm Jason Kinney, Head of Marketing for LiquidSpace.
Elizabeth Kim, Director of Talent, IDEO.
And I'm Natalie Engels. I'm a Design Director with Gensler.
Each of you have been selected because of your expertise in your area of focus. And during the day today, we had a chance to brainstorm, come up with ideas, compare insights, find areas that we agree on and don't agree on. And we've worked together in small groups to define some provocative statements, which we'll bring forward. The first thing that I'd like to do is to talk about some stats that were recently introduced from an Adobe study. And this is really about the future of work. And they interviewed folks in a quantitative study from around the globe, from different countries. And we found a few interesting things. One of them is that workers prefer, even over perks or cool office spaces, but having the highest form of technology was rated as the most important thing for workers. They want good tech. The other second thing we found out is that even though workers feel like they have to work and are laborers, that we found that 80% of US office workers would continue to work even if they won the lottery. And the third one out of four is that we're seeing the rise of the freelancer or gig or job economy. 1 out of 3 US workers is moonlighting. That means they're working after hours. 1 out of 4 in the UK and 1 out of 2 in India. We'll talk about what that means in a second. Now, despite the need for folks that want more technology in the workplace, the study found that 3 out of 4 office workers believe that public health will worsen as people become more attached to devices. That's kind of an oxymoron. So to kick things off, I would like to first talk about people, which is the most important aspect in the workforce, and really talk about what are, from the group, and get you guys to chat, is let's talk about this new type of worker, and starting with this new flex worker. What is this flex worker?
Okay, we have talent and we have availability and time, right? If you look at talent, I interviewed a lot of employers for this for this think tank, and this is what I found, that employers see talent as top category, which is A, who are dying to build something. There is B, which is the average, and then there is C, who definitely do not fit into the organization, eventually move out, and is a part of an on-demand economy. So yeah, eventually with socio-economic changes and with how we bring in technology and how we make certain workforce redundant, this is exactly what is going to happen. We will have the top layer building companies and products, the middle layer because of redundancy joining the top layer or joining the bottom layer as it goes. That's what I see.
Well, thank you. Kate, maybe you can add on top of this. Are you seeing a trend on how millennials are working related to what Nabonita said?
Yeah, definitely. So I think that it gets down to asking what people want, and often it's freedom and flexibility. So I think we often went through life before with this perceived notion of security, and I think people going through college and were ticking the boxes found that that wasn't often the case, and so people are now realizing that they can take a little bit more risks, or to kind of follow what they want to work on and be passionate about that. So I think it's really about seeking flexible ways of working.
Hey, Natalie, in your work in helping to design offices, maybe you could build off what you're seeing. What are some of these future trends when it comes to people and their employers?
Yeah, well, I think especially in the larger corporations, we're really seeing this focus turn to people and the individual. So almost individuals or employees becoming guests. Really, what is their personal journey? What are these experiences that they're having every day, and how can that be enhanced?
Can you build off that, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, I think to both your guys' point is really that freedom and flexibility have replaced job security. So if you think of a lot of our infrastructure, if you think of how the world has built, I think I said this earlier, organizations need to sort of relook at what they have for currency, you know, what is valuable to employees, and instead of maybe monetary incentives, look at lifestyle as currency and, you know, different aspects that they can use.
Build off that, and I'd love to hear from the group. Lifestyle as currency.
Yeah, I loved the lifestyle as currency. Well, I think, that's part of it, right? We're looking to enhance our lives. This whole idea of life-work balance versus work-life balance, and it really is a lifestyle. You know, it's what we're doing. It's the technology that's out there now is all lifestyle focused, and so bringing that into the workplace, I think, is true. And so upping that, letting that become the currency that's traded or given.
I'll give a great example. So. I've been in technology for a long time, since I was pretty young, and what I've found in recently with hiring a lot of people is we're able to attract some of the top engineering talent from big companies like Facebook, Google, Apple, who are making significant dollars. I mean, you have 21-year-old, 22-year-old kids out of school making salaries upwards of $250,000 a year. A lot of these people don't have degrees. And we're able to recruit them simply by saying, hey, listen, you're going to have a more flexible lifestyle. You're going to get to use really interesting technology. You're going to be able to work remotely. And in many cases, to individuals, that's worth $50,000, $100,000 in salary reduction. And we're seeing that at our company, you know, every single day.
And something you said earlier as well, in terms of that lifestyle kind of benefit, is not only the tangible things that you can get from the company, it's also the passion that you get out of the work that you do, and by creating new opportunities for incoming employees to really take advantage of the opportunities there to be passionate for the work they do as well.
Yeah, we're definitely seeing like this shared vision, shared purpose, and mission to go out and to do things together. Yeah.
I think the change is a lot of people are thinking shorter term now. They're thinking in the moment versus the old cliche of like planning an entire career. I graduate university, I'm going to be here, I'm going to work here, I'm going to work my way up the ladder, I'm going to retire from this company. I think people are focused on the sort of live in the moment right now, where they're saying a $50,000 reduction in salary is worth, you know, 3 extra hours at home with my daughter every week or something like that. And I think people now realize that because of the opportunities and flexibility and freedom of choice and ability to start their own companies and all these wonderful things that are happening based on, you know, the cloud and mobile and all these technologies that enable it, people are finding that the most important thing isn't, you know, that net salary at the bottom of the paycheck every week. There's a lot of really interesting things that they will trade off for that. Of course, long term, they want to do well and retire, but you know, I do think people right now are thinking more in the moment versus full-length career.
Well, they're also thinking about how to collect different sets of really great experiences to build their own personal journey, right? So in the past, you would go to IBM, and there was this 10 to 20-year plan. You know, you're going to go through all these different levels, and here what's happening is people are taking 2-year, 1-year stints at different places and really collecting an eclectic set of experiences, which are making them more valuable and also accelerating their growth at an incredibly fast pace, because it's hard to really grow once you know an organization that well.
We have panelists from UK, Australia, Canada, but I would love to hear your perspective from Asia. Nabanita, what are you seeing with workers in India?
Well, there's a huge drive to build products, build services. Right? I mean, just since you mentioned India, we do have this Make in India campaign big time going on. So people are really driven to build their own product, build their own services. But then having said that, that is also creating a huge requirement for the talent, wherein the employers have the ownership extremely shared with the employees who are building it. So yes, this is where the future is, where the employer will not manage the business anymore. They will just manage the employee, and the employee will go ahead and manage the business. So culturally, we see that as a shift. This is also creating a shift in terms of economy, because I can give you certain cases, such as there's Mr. Kunal Shah, who founded Freecharge. It's one of the largest mobile banking, mobile coupon-based company. Now, when he started this firm, he was almost mentored and to an extent funded by his ex-boss. So this is how the economy is building. It's not just the talent, it's not just one industry, it's impacting a country as a whole, or rather a region as a whole. That's what I would want to add.
Mm-hmm. And you had mentioned that third tier of category of types of employment, and it seems like that kind of gig economy tier might allow for less impact if things don't work out when you go and do this thing that you really want to do, because you have other opportunities that are easy to get into, that continue to build your skill sets, and that still give you that kind of overall story that you're looking to.
They often call it like dating. It's almost like, look,
Yeah.
try a few things out, see
Love
how it goes, and then maybe you'll find a long-term fit.
And you get paid well, so you're covered.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and the barriers to entry to we start off in our careers and we think, this is what I want to be when I grow up. And the reality is, what we want to be when we grow up changes every 2, 3, 5, 10 years.
Yes.
And what we can do now is lower the risk associated with those career changes. So the gig economy or job economy, I can now pick up a new skill, a new part of my portfolio, learn something new, at lower risk to me. And really, is that what I want to do?
Yeah.
Right.
And there's less shame when it doesn't work out. I think if you have a full-time job or you try a new career path in the past and it didn't work out, it was a huge kind of burden, or we didn't talk about it as much, and now it's just like, well, let's try something else.
But in some ways, the mindset of employees has, especially as they're becoming younger, is there's gig economy and there's just longer gigs, which are full-time employment, right?
Right.
It's like 2 years, gig, right? Next 2 years, what's my next gig? So there's almost like a gigification of jobs, which is really interesting, but also going to present some opportunities and challenges for us on the talent and HR side.
Or rather Ubering of talent. Or rather Ubering of talent. You need a talent, you just Uber in.
Yeah.
That's it.
Well, it's interesting because if you think of the shift that I see happening is that instead of working for companies are having to work for people. And that's a pretty significant shift.
Well, thank you, Matt. Let's dig into that. In your group, Elizabeth, you guys, and I could hear the trend. The trend I could hear from all of you was the power shifting away from the employer to the employee. Shocker, right? And that is untraditional how corporates are set up. Now, what are some of the things that you found in your group that focused on people? Some of the some bold statements.
It's about provocations for the
Yeah, sure, all of it.
I mean, I think one thing is that we are going to see, individuals emerge as important star brands, and that today, when you're going out on the market, you're looking at some of the biggest names in talent, and they're sort of vetting you. That thing can reverse pretty quickly, where we're fighting for, the employees are really fighting for the 10 best software folks who can provide the 100x value, or maybe they decide to take actually a different role in the economy, which is offer themselves up as contract or freelance services. So I think that's one important trend. Kate, you also saw some interesting trends as well.
In the portfolio career. And
Yeah, in the portfolio careers in terms of activating a new set of people in the workforce.
Yeah, I think that when we talk about the kind of concept of the personal versus professional brand, I view us as becoming very much entrepreneurial and independent professionals long term, and attaching to organizations as nodes rather than being absorbed and almost being faceless within organizations. So I think as we start to become more independent and workers that are all freelance and entrepreneurial, then employees have to, the whole notion of work and an organization needs to change to suit what people are actually doing day to day.
So here's a debate topic, and I'd love to hear from the group. Right now, the way the employment works and the hiring process works, and Elizabeth is a HR executive, is a company issues that they have a job opening with a job posting and a job description. Could we see in the future, in the next 5 to 10 years, where employees will say, here are the skills that I bring, now you employers bid for me?
That already happened.
Yeah.
Let's hear about it.
Yes. That's exactly what is happening. I mean,
Please tell
I
us
mean, the
more.
best recruiting organizations today are definitely going out hunting for people and building pipelines. And we do unofficially get into the bidding wars when we're at the final stages of the offer. So I think you're already seeing moments of that. It will, I think, become even more extreme as, you know, as talent becomes increasingly specialized.
So an interesting thing is, like, traditionally in a company, in order to create a lot of value, you need to sit very high in the organization, sort of in a deductive, top-down command and control organization. And I think what's happening is, like, as we move from industrial age to knowledge workers to creative workers, what's changing at each one of those shifts is an individual's leverage, but at any layer in the corporation. And so now it's like a single engineer can have as much impact as a CEO, you know, running 1,000 people, if that person is sufficient with the sufficient distribution, technology, et cetera. And we're starting to see that. Engineers, designers, creative talent are becoming much more like basketball stars or movie stars or whatever the case may be, where one person can create disproportionate value to the company. And so that's a pretty radical shift.
Well, it's that ability to build your brand. People know who the best actors are, they know who the best athletes are because they're out there and you can see them. That's something we never had at work. The only person that knew what you were doing at work years ago was your manager, because at the end of the year or the end of the week, you reported up to them. Collaboration tools, social tools, whichever buzzword we want to insert here, whether externally, you know, in social media or internally inside your company, have given people the ability to share what it is they're working on. From an engineer checking in code in GitHub to a marketing person answering questions on Twitter, it doesn't matter. We've been able to raise the elevation of awareness of what we do. You know, we started off 15 minutes or so ago talking about that people want things other than money, you know, as reward. One of the things we've always seen that people want is recognition. It doesn't have to be $1, it doesn't have to be a Starbucks gift card. It can be, people want to be valued for what they're contributing. And I remember early, you know, in my career, hearing stories of managers taking credit for people's work and things like that. And that used to drive employees crazy, especially if you're junior and your manager got promoted because of something you did. That's next to impossible now inside organizations, because if you are sharing what it is you're doing, whether it's in an internal social network or if it's external in social media, guess what? You're building your reputation. So I think it's exciting that the tools are enabling us to get credit for what we do. I think that's a big change.
It's working both ways. It's working for the talent to brand themselves. It's also working for the employer, where the HR can go ahead and brand the company. Because the HR is aware of the talent pool, the HR is aware of the workflow, the HR is aware of the pay scale, everything. So with that kind of level of information, I think HR is best armed weapon, I mean, whatever.
Imagine if companies bragged about their employees. Yeah. Like, you have teams that say, you know, we have Stephen Curry on our team, you know, this is what makes the team good. It's not promoting the team, they're saying we have superstars. I don't know if any of you run into a situation where company X says, you know, it's not the product that we make or how cool our office is. We're great because so-and-so is our head of engineering or head of
You
something.
see a little bit of that in terms of
great?
press releases
Yeah.
and things like that about who's joined what team.
Yeah.
But I think the distribution channels are so much more vast now that the story can become bigger than what it
Superstar
used to be.
employees, it's
Yeah,
amazing.
you can create content and put it wherever you need it to put.
Yeah.
You also want to have like superstar teams. It's not just about the Stephen Curry. It's how do you get
Yeah.
groups of people to have impact.
And what you're accomplishing in that
We were
team.
talking earlier about how you know, it's the job of the company to attract and make things exciting for the employees to keep them there.
Yeah.
And I think that has a lot to do with like, what are the new values and the new processes that companies are going to do to let workers like do their best, right? People want to come to work, have an impact, be creative, and have fun. One of the trends we're seeing is like, you know, structured like hack fests, like Friday is creativity day. You know, next Tuesday, we're gonna spend 12 hours doing nothing but the craziest ideas we could ever dream of. And then we shine the light and celebrate that. And that seems to be something we're seeing in terms of attracting and keeping this next generation of talent.
Well, I've always said I want to be the worst player on the best team.
Yeah.
Because if you're surrounded by others that are better than you, it's going to make you do more. So it's almost, if you're already the superstar, there's a lot of weight on your shoulders. But you know, to learn from those others. I love your idea of that it's not just the individual, it's the team. And yeah, how do you market that your company hires great teams? That's a great
I think this
thing.
issue around marketing of your internal brand and your internal culture is so important, because We know with millennials, they're really looking for a lot in a short period of time, right? They're going to stay for a shorter period. They want to learn. They want to have rapid career progression. And to really deliver on all those things, you need to have an organization that is really focused on culture and engagement. I think the organizations that can get ahead of that will do a lot better because that brand is transparent now. You know, 5 years ago, you couldn't really get inside an organization. Today, it's all on Glassdoor. So when you screw up or when you do well, it's all immediately out into the...
Yeah, you mentioned Glassdoor, and we're talking about the difference between what a company makes and working there. Okay, let's go cliche. You know, Apple's the coolest, most innovative company to work for in the world. Well, they're not in the top 100 on Glassdoor for employees. So they make the coolest products, but nobody wants to work there. Like, it's an interesting sort of thing. So you can have companies nearly not as innovative, but are a lot better place to go every day.
So what advice would you guys give to HR and other executives on managing these stars? And there's a question in from the live stream, is how can companies actually quantify this, what you said, Matt, about currency, lifestyle as a currency? Should this be in the actual compensation report? How can we formalize this in the future and prepare execs?
Well, you've got countries now that are doing things like moving away from the definition of GDP per capita to happiness per capita. And I think there's a transition that's similar in terms of your employee engagement and happiness and impact quota. And so I can see a lot of leaders really finding new and innovative ways to publish and merchandise that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the happiness report, Natalie, you want to build up that?
There's a way to measure happiness in a non-subjective way. I think that's what you really need. It can't be, you know, because I could have woken up in a great mood, so everything's going to be perfect today, right? But how am I really feeling about the different spaces that I'm working in and engaging with?
And happiness is mushy, right? It's not even sure that it has any monetization, if I were to be so crass. But I do think we have to think about whether happiness does lead to greater productivity, right? Greater retention. Like, you have to be able to monetize those.
So we at Factory, we work with a lot of really large organizations, and we hear the same thing from CEOs all over the world within the Fortune 500, and it's all about becoming more innovative. It's like, how do we become more innovative? How do we become more innovative? And the thing is that if you look at the current strategies, if you look at how businesses are optimized today, they're mostly optimized to meet short-term rewards, right? Every single part of the organization, from HR to marketing to product development, et cetera, is all aligned around sort of hitting that next incremental number, which from my perspective is diametrically opposed to being innovative. And so I think that what we need to do is we need to say, hey, if we're really serious about being innovative, if we're really serious about building new types of products, new solutions, et cetera, then how do we align our compensation and how do we align our incentive structures not to sort of obedience or short-term, what the street's going to report in the next few months, but actually like major targets downstream and create more of a shared environment where employees can participate that and sort of choose their risk tolerance around that. And that's been the elephant in the room that every big company wants to be innovative, but no one wants to sort of address that question.
So innovation opportunities as a form of that currency. I think that's right. And also we mentioned purpose would be another one, which I think you brought in. So as we round out the discussion on people, we need to look at the next generation. And some of you are millennials, and I heard over dinner that some of you already feel old as millennials. I won't pick anybody on anybody. But what can we see from this next generation, this generation Y and Z? How will they be different? Natalie, you have some thoughts on this.
Yeah, I mean, they really are so fluid with technology already, and they're. It's really interesting to see how they're starting to learn almost the rules of engagement in a team, So as they play Minecraft, and just to use a specific example, but they are joining each other's worlds on a server so that then they can build something that their friend doesn't know how to build. They're creating this space, or they're adapting it for either their use or their other friend's use. and they're doing the same thing back into their world. So they have to be responsible to the other one, in that they're not, being malicious about anything. That's definitely a greater good. So I think they're going to be able to take that and bring it into the workplace. They're already building these team structures and how to rely on one another. But hopefully it also is starting to build this foundation that they're going to be able to be very flexible and fluid with their work environment. And hopefully with technology, and if it can get to where we want it to go, that there's definitely going to be kind of endless opportunities for them to be able to create space how they want to and work how they want to when they need to. Right now, if they came in, I think it would be a shock.
Yeah, so I think it's important for people to feel valued, and I think Gen Y especially, it's about doing things with purpose and feeling valued and feeling like you're making a difference.
What does that mean, purpose?
What you're doing is part of something that's kind of greater than yourself, and that you can have an impact on that thing that you're working on.
The shareholder value count, or is it bigger than that?
No, I think people think that a lot of the time, if they would be absorbed in a big org, that they're a number. They're literally a number, and that they can't really have a big impact. And I think a lot of things now, especially when we see, small is a new big and entrepreneurialism, is that people can start something and make it grow and go big and make a difference with a very lean footprint. So I think that that's important. And also on the Gen Z thing, I think privacy is going to be increasingly important because they are the generation that's grown up living their everyday existence online publicly. And that poses interesting questions about the concept of personal versus professional brands and when do you switch off and what is the difference.
I like, Natalie, your point around, sort of going back to the Minecraft expectation. And if one of the trends that we saw from technology and education was the gamification of education as a way to engage and excite and pull teams and students together to learn, I think that, right now in 2016, you've got a couple million people here in the United States, students who are graduating or entering the workforce. They're going to expect the appification of the work environment.
Yes.
Right, this is the app gen, and they can and should expect I can drag and drop my apps to get my work done seamlessly, quickly, using. They don't want to take a step back.
Yes.
Since you mentioned education, I would want to add on to it. What I see, the next generation, they would come with that foundation learning, but the rest of the learning at work would be either social learning or the postcard size learning, wherein they learn right when they need to learn, and they ended there. I have the number of next generation people I spoke to, they are excited about certification, they are being paid for the certification, but when it comes to getting the certification, they are fine with what they are learning at work. I mean, most of them even felt that the curriculum had some redundant part, which is why they don't require it at work. Even though the employer, Mr. Bhushan Chandrakant, he kept ensuring that no, I want my employees to go and get a certification done. The employees were far too happy just to learn at work. So the learning, the entire learning, the way we learned and the way they are learning, it's entirely different. So the education part, application that you said, it's almost on steroids. So.
Yep.
So I just pulled up this quote real quick, which is hilarious. So the quote is, "The children now love luxury, they have bad manners, contempt for authority, they show disrespect for elders, and love chatter in the place of work." And that's I don't know if you guys know, but that's a 2,000-plus-year-old quote from Socrates. And so generationally, I'm just hearing this discussion, and every generation, whether it's like me with my dad or like me with like the next generation, is this conversation of, hey, how are things changing, and how will they want things to be? And I think the challenge with this discussion is that without building it together, without having them as part of the innovative process, so it's like if we want to build innovative products for the next generation, the way to do it is not by us sitting around discussing it or interviewing them or doing reports. It's actually engaging them and involving them in our creative process. And I feel like as a society, whether it's the older generations or the younger generations, the sort of modern work world puts a lot of constraints around those two things.
Matt, I think you bring up a great point. So the people aren't changing and the behaviors aren't changing, but the next topic is that technology is changing. And so this is part two. We're seeing an increase of technologies emerging. Social networks, Alan and I have been covering that, and that's a already dominant market, and Adobe's in that market as well. But now we're seeing new things emerge like bots, whether they're chat bots in Siri or Facebook M or in in Echo. We're also seeing the rise of autonomous creatures emerging. For example, news is coming out today that Foxconn has replaced over 60,000 workers in China with robots over the last few months. The White House put out a report a few weeks ago that 83% of people who make $20 or less will be automated through technology. 83% of low-paid workers. And we're also seeing the rise of new things emerge like AR and virtual reality. So I'd love to get the group's discussion as if technology is changing, are the human conditions changing? And what does that mean to work? I'd love to hear from you, John, like this dichotomy of regular consumer tech that's coming at a fast pace versus inside of companies.
This kind of comes back to that point around, let's call it the app gen, where pick your modern enterprise, your big company here in the United States, you tend to walk in the door and you're using software that was built and deployed maybe by corporate IT, and it's probably 2, 5, 10, 15 years old. And it's way behind your expectations around how you want and should work. At home, we're starting to approach this point where you can reach out to a device and some cloud service is working on your behalf. It's telling you what the traffic is going to be, what the weather's going to be like today, or maybe if you need new groceries. I think what we'll see in the next 3 to 5 years is the arrival of knowledge worker bots, call it Siri for the enterprise, if you will, that's dynamically working on my behalf, either as an individual or like as a team, and it's just taking all the manual stuff out of the way. It's, Matt was talking a lot about the creativity work, and that's what we love to do. And what gets in the way of us being creative? It's the manual stuff. And so let's have these intelligent bots work on our behalf, generate our reports, set up team structures for us. Like that's going to be a big leverage point in the next few years.
I totally agree, AI and bots, and you and I were talking, the cliche is, hey, that was a great idea, I'll have my bot contact your bot, and, human interaction's going to be gone and things, but I think there's a really important part to this whole AI world. I hear so much news and so much hype and so much buzz about something replacing something. So these bots are going to replace humans, or this tool is going to replace that tool. And I really think it's more about augmenting than replacing.
Yes.
If you look at the Industrial Revolution, mechanical tools replaced physical processes. Cranes can lift more than we can with shovels. I think bots are going to do the same thing. They're going to augment our mental processes, not replace them. IBM Watson is going to help doctors understand medical conditions better. My AI bot in my email is going to help filter out the conversations I shouldn't think about and help me with the ones that I do. It's not going to replace things. It's not going to replace us. It's going to hopefully, for the first time, allow us to focus on the things that need to be focused on. They can do, I think you used the word, the mundane tasks. So if I don't have to go back and forth scheduling meetings, or jump over to LinkedIn and read each of your profiles to find out about you. If bots can automate those things, then I can actually do what I'm hired to do.
Yes.
So they're not going to replace me. They're going to make me better.
Well,
And that's what I'm excited about.
And I agree with that, but it depends on your salary band, right? If you're making $20 an hour, like you just said about the 80,000 people that just got laid off from Foxconn or whatever.
60K.
60,000. There's going to be this gap because we have technology increasing. So for knowledge workers, for creatives, so on and so forth, we'll be able to move to higher forms of abstraction, achieve higher amounts of leverage, et cetera, et cetera. But if your best skill is as a taxi driver and you're replaced by a machine, you now all of a sudden need to go upgrade your skills so that you can be transferring into one of those higher technology roles, right? And so I do think that, I do agree with you totally, but there is going to be this massive gap that continues to grow in terms of our ability to quickly teach, train, and I think there's an onus on these companies who are creating this technology to figure out, okay, well, how do we quickly train and make, people that are losing their jobs, how do we make them productive members of society, and how do we not send them for a 4-year degree, but how do we teach them technical skills or design skills or whatever we need to do really, really quickly.
But I think that's a natural progression of a society in general. You can think about all of our revolutions. We've gone through the same thing where a certain set of the kind of economy is replaced by technology, and that set of economy needs to go and figure out what's the next step for them. And I don't think it's just up to the companies themselves. I think it's up to kind of the broader society to figure out how to fit that into the economy overall.
Just a provocative question though, would you rather be earning $15 an hour today in 2016 or $15 an hour, in the year 2005? And it's sort of like a no-brainer to me, because if my access to capital, access to build and create amazing net new things is like 50 years ahead today than where we were like 5 or 10 years ago. Now anything I can imagine, I can tap into people around the world who can build it and create it and use their 3D printer, their graphic design agency, their developers, and I can just take my idea to market so much faster. The startup CapEx expenditures for me are like way lower. So I think there's, the flip side of this sort of knowledge gap is also the access to expertise is infinitely better.
And there's knowledge in those 60,000 employees' heads. Obviously, we can't leverage all of them. Like, how do you figure out which ones can help whatever happens next? How can they help the next company that hasn't automated? Or how can they build the processes that the robots are replacing them with? How can they teach them those things? So, and as you said, we go through this every single cycle of technology since the invention of the wheel and fire has replaced somebody. So I just think the scale, to Matt, your point is the scale is so much bigger now. One thing can replace hundreds as opposed to one-to-one replacements. Yeah. And that's a challenge that we have to figure out how to deal with.
So what's interesting though too is for the first time you have, the quality of life in the lowest country in the world today is higher than the country with the highest level of quality of life in 1800.
Sure.
So we've seen this massive proliferation of increase in quality of life around the world, which is great, and that's what a lot of people put up and sort of, hey, the world's getting better. But if you sort of look deeper, what's interesting in modern, in fully industrialized countries like the United States, for the first time in history, the gap between the wealthy and the poor is increasing at also a significant rate. So you have these sort of two opposite trends happening, and I think that will, we could have a whole future on that,
So,
but that's an interesting thing to consider.
With artificial intelligence and bots, and to augment, as Alan put forward, and make us more productive, do you think that tomorrow's, or in 5 years from now, workers will work more or less? Let's discuss.
More.
More?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I don't know if
Absolutely.
they'll work more, because we should be able to work more efficiently. We should be able to work better.
Efficiently, yes, but then the kind of passion that I already see, I can only see that growing. So I mean, it might not be absolutely work at your workstation. It might be work and network and even building ecosystem. So it will roll into different forms. But yes, we are going to work more for that. That's for sure.
Email was going to replace phone calls, and blogs and wikis were going to replace email, and social networks were going to replace blogs and wikis. And every time throughout those 20 years, we've been told we'll become more productive, we'll become more efficient, we'll become more effective. My work week doesn't end on Wednesdays yet. I still have a full work week, and with mobile and these things, we work all the time.
Exactly.
We wake up, we check our phones, we go to sleep, we check our phones. I think if history dictates, no, we're not going to work any less. Hopefully we'll work more effectively. Hopefully we'll work on the right things. If I can provide value to my company instead of scheduling meetings, then I'm fine if it's still 40 hours or 45 hours or 50 hours. 10 years from now, the same number of hours, but I hope I'm using them better. I hope I'm doing better at things.
Alan, it's the passion which is going to snowball. So work, hours, measurement, I think this will just become irrelevant, and it's just what you're doing, you'll put yourself into it, and it doesn't matter how many hours.
Bots can replace expense reports, that alone.
Yeah, that would be key.
How many hours would that get us all back?
My God, that's like 50% of my week right now.
But I think that's absolutely right. Like you touched on the connectivity that we have now. So Internet of Things is making it much easier for me to check my email when I'm at dinner with my phone, or even at home. Who knows what's going to be integrated in the next 5 years? So I'm just constantly in front of work, and so it's going to make it harder to shut off and harder to create a line between life and work. And so hopefully you're doing something passionate that you don't mind doing the extra time with that work.
We've got airplane mode for our phones.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
this time we had airplane mode for our work.
Yeah.
So maybe it's a home time mode.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay. So I'd like to hear from the technology group on some of your declarative statements. And Alan, would you mind kicking things off? And then let's hear from John and then Matt, and then get the group kind of to react as well.
Sure. I think my declarative statement, if I remember correctly, was, and it's not 1 year from now, but probably 3 or 5 or some, we're supposed to be thinking future, the tools we use at work will not resemble the tools we use today. I think for the last decade, they essentially look the same. If you look at an email client today, it looks like an email client 10 years ago. If you look at a chat client today, it looks like a chat client 20 years ago. You know, the Microsoft Office and Adobe tools that we use have just moved from our PC to the web. They're the same thing, though. I think that's going to change. I think we've reached a level where they're fulfilling everything they can. They can't get any more mobile or any more cloud-based or any more. I think we're going to have a new type of tool, we can call it a digital canvas or something like that, that brings together, that aggregates together, that automates more of the things that we're doing instead of so many discrete silos of tools. Today, to get the simplest task done, to come here to this event, you know, there was an email and a calendar entry and an agenda created, and we booked flights and we did hotels, and there's a map to get to where we're 25 different tools to do a simple, you know, day-long event. That should be some new breed of tool. It should be a breed of tool. Slack's nothing like that whatsoever, not even in the vicinity of what that tool does.
Does the
It's a
group
chat-
think
it's a
that
chat client.
maybe augmented reality or virtual reality could accomplish his future vision?
It will allow us to visualize information in much more effective ways than we can today. Today we're pretty limited by the visual space that we have. I can only put so many Post-it notes on my monitor and look around so many things. And I think things like augmented reality have potential to dramatically help that, but the friction has to be the friction to benefit ratio has to change. We're not going to walk around with big headsets on just so we can look around in 3D. I think as the friction reduces and the benefits increase, augmented reality can absolutely play a role in that.
Okay. John, what do you think?
Yeah, I think just building on that, one declarative thought that our team really believes in is that the creative worker is going to be the app developer of the future. Today we rely on someone else in IT to go build a business application to help our team get our job done. That world moves too slowly, it's too disconnected, it's siloed, and it's not the way that the app generation works. People and teams should be able to drag and drop services and workflows and connected data that pulls together our customer relationship and our customer success and our inventory and my lunch ordering, and just pull that into an app that our team can create ourselves. So no more going to an app store for the enterprise. The individual in the team can now create it.
That really builds off what Natalie was saying, how Gen Y, they're building their world in Minecraft. And we'll start moving, we'll talk about that in the next section as well. So the power is still shifting to the people. That's what I'm hearing. Matt, what do you think?
I think it's crazy that, you know, I know what your relationship status is, but I have no idea about what you're actually trying to push forward in the world. I have no idea about what your values are, what your mission is, what your skills are, but I know what you ate for lunch. And so a big thing that I've been thinking about a lot, and we've been thinking about at Factory, is that if you look at how the dominant organizing structure of the internet today, it's fundamentally past-based. So if you look at Facebook, when Facebook came out, the big thing that it did is they came up with the concept of what a friend is. What is a friend? It's somebody that you met in the offline world, not somebody that you haven't met yet that you should meet. It's somebody that you went to high school with, or somebody that you met at a party, probably somebody that you don't want to talk to. You lost contact for good reason. And so, and that's what's called the social graph. We sort of up-leveled our consciousness and went to what I call the interest graph, which is which was the move from Facebook to Instagram, which was more about sort of, hey, I don't know you, or Twitter, whatever the case may be, but we're both interested in business, we're both interested in photography, maybe we're both interested in sports or cooking, so we're going to follow each other, we're going to share information. Where I think we're going is the intention graph, which is really about the future, which is that, hey, I don't know you, we might not even have any of the same interests, but we're both trying to push forward the same body of work, so let's get connected. If you think of how this group's come together, it's amazing, but it's pretty random. I mean, it's pretty much like, hey, this person and that person, and we know here, and like, let's all get together and have this great discussion. But could there have been an algorithm that was created where we could have all met 5 years ago, and we would all be already working together, already collaborating together? And so I think that's one of the things that's one of the things the internet's failed to deliver on. I mean, we spend most of our time online organizing our offline relationships, email, social media, all those sorts of things. So what happens when we leverage the internet to figure out where we actually are going, who we should meet?
That's great. Now, did your group come up with some provocative statements that we can get the group to react to?
Sure, I can start with mine. It was, where are you going to balance privacy and security versus convenience? So for all of these new ways of working and AI and bots and integrated tools and all these wonderful things we're predicting are going to happen, you actually have to give them a lot of information about yourself, or else they're not going to be able to assist you that much. So we're going to have to figure out how do we balance those scales of convenience versus privacy. So that was one of the things that we were thinking about for the future.
I think a follow-on part of that is, does that expectation of security and kind of knowledge share change by generation? So a lot of Generation Z doesn't necessarily think about what's going to happen to their information when they put it out there. So does there also need to be an education around your work information and how that needs to stay secure as people are engaging in social media and everywhere else?
Matt, you had another question as well, which is about fairly provocative around big companies and venture capital.
Where's the innovation?
Yeah, well, I think it's what's funny is that a lot of big business is oriented around competition, and historically that competition has been big companies competing with other big companies. You know, Nike competing with Adidas, Samsung competing with Sony. And there's been a shift over the past several years where it's like, hey, maybe we're not competing with other big bureaucratic behemoths like ourselves. Maybe we're competing with startups in the garage. And I think that's been good. It's been definitely sort of a shift in the right direction. But I actually think who big companies are really competing with are venture capitalists, because fundamentally business is about whoever can get the best talent wins, and whoever can create the right best atmosphere, environment, structure. And fundamentally, as it stands right now, if you look at the past 5 years, venture capital is just fundamentally a better structure. It's a better incentive structure. There's more freedom. There's a bunch of things for attracting talent and creating innovation in the world. And so I think a big thing for big companies to consider is, hey, instead of funding these VCs, instead of funding them as LPs and creating competition who are creating startups who are doing that, what would it look like if we ourselves were a platform and we could leverage all the things that we have, from distribution to talent to know-how? What if we flipped from being a product essentially to being a platform and started thinking like VCs?
Interesting. And it is ironic because most corporations are the ones that fund the VCs.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Who end up building
It's
the
madness.
startups who sell it back to them.
Yeah.
Great. What else on technology? Maybe we could talk a little bit about virtual reality, the technology du jour. We're seeing Oculus, we're seeing Samsung's got there, we're seeing all these different versions coming out. What's the group's take? Is this reality or is it overhyped in the context of work?
Okay, I'm certainly happy to jump in. This is a fun one. First, for the viewers, let's establish what the difference between virtual reality and augmented reality is, because maybe everyone doesn't follow that. Virtual reality, for the most part, is you're wearing a headset, you're not seeing the world around you, you're being presented a digitized version of something. It could look like the real world, or it could be a fantasy world, space and castles and dragons, whatever you'd like it to be. Augmented reality, you're seeing what's in the real world, but you're having information overlaid on top of that. So when I look at each of your faces, I see your names in little bubbles above you, things like that. The potential for that information augmentation is huge. I think the ability for people to be able to look at colleagues or look at spaces or look at buildings or look at materials they're building on manufacturing lines and see more information about them, to have customer service people be able to look at a broken part and see the part number around it and the cases that are fixing it. For an architect to look at a building in the real world instead of a set of blueprints. And for employees, it's the ability to interact better in things like meetings. So instead of sending a meeting invite to a WebEx meeting and seeing a 2D representation of those people, well, why can't you sort of look at the way we're sitting around today and having more interaction? I think that is going to help the way we work, but as I mentioned earlier, I think the friction still has to decrease. We are not going to all be walking around with headsets on, but technology is going to improve. Look at the first cell phone versus the phone that you have today. So augmented reality is going to be overlaid into your glasses and your contact lenses and all sorts of new ways of doing things. And I think we will absolutely be able to have access to the information we need to make decisions faster or build relationships better or things like that at work.
Yeah, in fact, if social learning can be replicated in an AR kind of an environment, I think that will resolve the challenges to telecommute. I mean, I can learn anyone from anywhere and have that nuanced learning through augmented reality. Yeah, that would definitely work.
Microsoft is showing with their HoloLens classes getting together to learn anatomy with 3D models instead of 2D Grey's Anatomy textbooks, or maybe once a month the ability to go see a cadaver. You know, so all of a sudden everybody can learn together and ask questions and spin the body around and see where parts and pieces go together. It's pretty amazing. So
I think one of our discussions earlier, though, was that virtual reality is not going to replace the importance or impact of people and teams coming together in person, right? There's something magic about ideation and creation, about just people coming together. So AR can augment our effectiveness and creativity, but virtual reality, I don't think any of us want to replace that person-to-person connection.
I don't.
Does everyone remember when Marissa Mayer famously, Yahoo's best strategy move to date, in quotes, sort of joking, is when she's like, "Hey, there's no more. You know, we're ending this remote work, right?" And I found that so ironic because they were living in a false dichotomy, right? They were like, "Hey, are you working at work or are you working at home?" And the reality is like, if you go into any conference room in corporate America, people are at work, but 12 people in a meeting, one person's on Facebook, the other person's IMing here, the other person's looking at photos from their last vacation. So the question to me is less about this, like, are we at work, are we at our office building, or are we at home? But when we're together, are we actually together? And are we making the most use of that time? And it just so happens that if you get together, once a month, and if it's the right amount of time and the right amount of focus, and people are actually present, you can get a lot done. And so I think we need new language for that.
Kate, you run a marketplace, CloudPeeps, for these remote workers, many who work at home.
Yeah.
What's the dichotomy between working at home and actually being physically next to somebody?
So I think that there's a lot of people that really value face-to-face, and they often say, you lack socialization. But I think the assumption there is that the people that we want to socialize with or have camaraderie or community with are our colleagues. But there are actually a lot of people that are in our immediate surroundings. So I think that it's not that we lose human touch when we work from home. I think you just get human touch or relationships built in a different way, which is one of the reasons why the Freelance Friday community came about, which was bringing people together.
What is that?
A monthly co-working community in around 12 cities in the world now, where people get together and work, cafes in these third spaces that we'll talk about, libraries, co-working, all of that together, and just share what they're working on. So if you ever go into a coffee shop or a cafe now in the middle of the day, so many people are working remotely online through their laptops, and it's just remarkable, just that change in the last 5 years. I remember when we first started CloudPeeps, we were working with a lot of companies that were really adverse to remote. So the fact that you weren't sitting next to them or in the same building, there was a lack of trust. But just in the last 18 months, it's absolutely changed. I think with Slack, even though it might not be, the full solution we're after, has changed a lot of the way people are working and communicating. So now I don't see as many people saying, "Oh, it's remote." And again, it doesn't have to be remote or nothing. We get together once a week and work face to face. So my team is also remote, and we also do retreats. So there's this huge growth in these startup or company retreats where people go to places like Tahoe or Santa Cruz and work face to face and co-live and co-work for a period of time. And there's a really good book called Remote, which speaks around how many ideas can you really generate in a meeting that you can actually execute upon. So if you were doing day-to-day meetings, you need to build in that time where you can go away and deliver on that strategy. So I actually prefer to go and do the creative session, get all the ideas out, do all the collaboration, the brainstorming, then let's go away and get it done.
That's a nice segue to the third topic, which is around physical places and spaces.
Yes.
And traditionally, there's been really two types of places. People would go to, they would wake up in the morning at home, have breakfast as a family, everybody sitting down. Then you get in your car and you drive to work, punch in, work for 8 hours exactly, punch out, drive home, and enjoy a steak dinner and maybe a cocktail. Does that sound familiar to everybody? No, we don't do that anymore.
80s.
So Jason, I would love for you to really share with us, what are the 3 types of workspaces that we're seeing now?
Yeah, so the idea originated in the late 80s, and the idea was that you had 3 spaces which you lived your life. You had the first place, which is your office, and that's where you did your work, traditional kind of business, clock in, clock out. You had second space. Second space was your home. That's where you did all of your personal. The theory really said that third place was a neutral zone where you didn't do anything from personal and you didn't do anything necessarily from business. You interacted with people, you kind of sat around. It was the coffee shops, the parks, things where you were just there. But what we're seeing in modern environment is a blending between all the spaces, specifically that third place. So when you go to get your cup of coffee in the morning, you actually do work there, and you see a lot of people that are working there. A lot of new environments are forming around that third place, so co-working spaces. It's meant to feel a lot like that third place, but to enable you to do the work that you need to get done in that third place. And so it's been interesting to see that come together.
Yeah, it's interesting. We had this conversation, this keeps coming up about work-life balance, and that work is first. And it's interesting that the first space is work.
Yeah.
And so then life being your second. And then, with this third space, we've realized that work is kind of the invader. It's now, it has invaded home. It has invaded the third space. So will there be a fourth that we can actually take a break? I don't know.
That comes back to
Well, yeah, we started by saying, work-life balance, and I made fun of that and said it's supposed to be life-work
Yes.
balance.
Yeah.
And then we get into cliches like it's not life-work balance, it's life-work blending, or it's life-work integrating, or blah, blah. And then I think you just said, it's just life. When are we going to break that ratio and just call it life? Because they are pretty much the same thing these days. And, we do want to be able to disconnect, though, and it isn't necessarily a generational thing. I think everybody wants the ability to disconnect. Matt, you said, you put your phone on airplane mode. That's great. You don't have to be hyper-connected at every moment. And I think the tools are enabling us, chat clients and you working with your remote employees, Kate, to get access to information at all times to everybody from wherever they are. But I think it's also really nice to learn when not to. That's an amazingly difficult skill. So people talk about fear of missing out, this FOMO, whatever, that drives me crazy when people talk about it. I think it's joy of missing out is something we should focus on. When do people find that time? I think, Matt's going to teach us all how to meditate, you said.
Well, no, I'm just learning. You should be teaching us.
Natalie can teach us.
Most welcome. But then what both of them pointed out, I think this is exactly where the future of telecommute lies. I mean, telecommute is such a strong strategy. Why did not every company implement it? Why it is just working mothers or sick employees, just few of the employees getting this kind of a benefit, and it's not exactly a work mode. And that's exactly where we are missing out. We need these kind of measures, what she mentioned about, and we need these kind of specified spaces which will have all these benefits, so that the person who's working, the employer knows that he has the connectivity, yes, he has that availability, so the work is going to be done. If there's a client call, it is going to be assessed. That's exactly where the future lies.
The tie-in there is that we need to understand what employees are looking for in that space and let them have the freedom to find that where they do their best work. So a lot of what we do at LiquidSpace is enabling people to find the space that they do their best work at. So whether that's a co-working facility, whether that's an actual office for your team of 10,
that's the future.
Give a space, but it requires employers and overall corporations to embrace that and say, I trust when my employee goes to this space.
And it's
Absolutely, with a measure like that, they will trust.
It's more than space, because the space is the container, but it's more than, because I think a lot of companies have come in and said, hey, let's get fancy offices and let's get foosball tables and so on and so forth. But it's the flexibility to have different modalities of working. So if you look at Einstein, real quick, sorry. If you look at Einstein, they studied his brain, And what they found is that his brain was relatively normal, but his corpus callosum, I believe, the part that connects the left and right hemisphere of the brain, was 3x larger than the average brain. And what Einstein's process was over 40 years is he would go and he would do hardcore left brain arithmetic, and then he would just go sit and he would like smoke his pipe and look up at the clouds for hours. And he would go back and forth between these modalities of working, and that's what led him to his insights. So if you think of how our modern day work structures are organized, we're being optimized to be single-celled organisms, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So Natalie, how do we become multi-cell organisms inside of companies? You help the amazing companies redesign or design their workplaces in the future. What does this look like in the future?
Oh gosh, well, I do think there is a lot of aspects about this third place, and I'm starting to toy with the idea of like we need to just call it fourth place. But the third place is really what needs to be embraced, so that multiple different types of people, and regardless of your industry or your the type of work that you're doing, that you can come together, because we're learning so much more from each other than just staying siloed by ourselves. And so is there a way? So one of the things that talking about, with opportunities and constraints about workplace today, is there a way for companies to embrace co-working to happen within their space? Let that flexibility happen. Now, yes, there's
in a
security.
corporation.
Yes, in the corporation, like in this third shared space, could co-working happen between different corporations, but maybe they have a shared bigger purpose. Or a bigger mission that they can go after together.
So let Adobe open up parts of their offices and let other Bay Area companies come in and
that's
share
what
that
LinkedIn
space.
have done in the Bay Area. There's a
Yeah.
co-working space in the foyer that everyone's doing meetups in,
Yeah.
going to co-work there.
And
so-
even cities are getting into this, right? You're seeing San Francisco opening up all of these public free spaces that typically have access to Wi-Fi, and they're open to the public, even if you have to walk through buildings to get to them. And they're great spaces. They're up on roofs. They're in the middle of museums, and they're creating these moments of collaboration between multiple types of people. You could even get to a point where you're at a playground, and that playground is meant for that blend of work and life, where a dad or a mom could be doing work and the kids playing on the playground. So you're blending where you do work to make it to where it doesn't feel like you're at one or the other place.
So related, we're getting a question from the live stream from Mark. Do you have any ideas of companies that are successfully implementing live-work balance? And if so, how are these companies doing it? We heard that one example from Kate. LinkedIn has got some of that with the co-working. What else are you guys seeing?
Buffer's doing an amazing job of having a really integrated culture. They do things like give employees Fitbits, Kindles. A lot of companies do unlimited vacation leave now. They'll pay for people to take vacations.
Like Netflix?
Yeah, well, more like Kindle books and things like that. But
So paying people to take vacations, how does that work?
so say if no one's taking a vacation, they'll be like, you can go for a month and take a vacation with your family, and they'll pay the person on top of their salary, I think, to do that.
Interesting.
Netflix is actually an interesting one too, because it's not just about the immediate perks. It's talking to their workforce and saying what's important to you with maternity leave, for example. I think that bubbled up from employee conversations, and I think now you can take up to a year and come back and be fine. So I think the key in kind of workplace discussions around how you evolve is really, what do our employees need to be successful? And sometimes that's flexibility. Actually, a lot of times that's flexibility within where and how you work. Sometimes that's the benefits. But regardless, it's understanding and communicating with your employee base and understanding what they need.
I mean, even letting the employee buy their own technology.
Absolutely, right.
That
Seems
that is
beyond
also a perk.
letting your own employees be successful, because as the market for talent continues to be as competitive, it's not just what do you need to succeed, it's what is it going to take to get you to stay for 6 months, a year longer, or even enter in the first place. So the ante is certainly feels like it's going up.
That's really interesting, though, because that's also starting to affect the communities around given companies, because other companies also have to offer those things and do those things to make it successful for their employees.
So what I'm hearing is that the companies have to serve the employees. And Natalie, you had a great quote about that as we were sitting in the hotel lobby yesterday. What was your insight from that?
Oh, just that as potentially co-working becomes higher, and there is this sense of concierge to work, where employers are trying to find, what really is going to work best for my employee. The employee has become a guest in the workspace. Yeah.
That's a big shift, a power shift, yet again, from the company, the employer, to the employee.
Yeah.
So here's a provocative question to the group. Should employers allow their own employees to work anywhere they want in the world? We're seeing this rise of like the home office. We're seeing the rise of co-working spots. We're seeing the rise of WeWork, which is and WeLive, which is a shared office home situation. Could you imagine that your employees could just go live in Switzerland in the Alps, and if they got their job done, that's okay?
Yeah.
Do you think
Yeah.
that's the future?
Yes.
Yeah.
They do that at LiquidSpace
Essentially.
really well.
I don't know. What's hard about that is the culture, and so you lose the sense of community and culture within your own brand. And so how maybe if technology can get to that point to where there is the ability to let culture be transparent from one place to another, like there is no strict
Unfortunately, not every
Yeah.
company is geared to be a global organization, too.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot, and you understand this better than I do, so I don't want to misspeak, but like how you pay people in different currencies and
Yes.
different rules and regulations, and it sounds wonderful in theory, and the internet enables us to work from everywhere, but I'm not an HR professional, but I would imagine it's more complicated than the kumbaya.
I did it for 2 years. I was a digital nomad living off Airbnb, and it is complicated, but
So WordPress is a pretty successful company.
automatic.
Third, Automatic, who makes WordPress. They're the third most visited, in aggregate, third most visited site on the net, right behind Facebook and Google. So massive scale. They have I think there are 500 employees, and they have a fully distributed workforce.
But
And
Matt,
I
this
think-
was the discussion we were having earlier, which is it really depends on the kind of work that you're doing,
Yeah.
the culture of the organization. So for a creative company like IDEO and perhaps Gensler,
Yeah.
it would be we'd have to do a lot of thinking about how to make a remote collaboration model like that work. Some real deep thinking about our process and where we add value, because I don't know that much about coding, but if mostly what your production unit is lines of code, and that is largely an independent process, that feels different when your value that you provide to the community is largely built on the creative
Well,
collaboration.
look at Burning Man, though, right? Like Burning Man has a very potent culture, right? It's pretty incredible, better than I would say most corporate cultures. And they meet once a year, and they've sort of maintained this culture. Now they don't need to be productive through that period, but I think that again we have like this false dichotomy of like at home or at the office, and it's obviously a combination of both, and it's more about like where on the spectrum do we want to be. But I like what you were saying earlier about could we have these immersions? So how we work on our team, it's like fully distributed. But once a month, the whole team has to get together, and that's when we do our sprint planning, and then we go through a 1-month cycle, and then we do daily scrums. And we're face-to-face once a month. We're checking in on video every single day. But there's people in San Diego, there's people here, there's people traveling overseas. And we found that really can work. So I think it is this combination.
And your point earlier about how millennials and we've grown up on IM communicating and forming community online. So when you say community and culture, that to me often is online communities that I've formed those relationships or worked with people. So I think it's not that dichotomy of you can only have community or culture if you're face-to-face or you met that person offline.
It's true, yeah.
I'll just be a contrarian. I don't think it's either or necessarily. But one of that we were talking earlier, like if you're a company and you do think it's important to have co-location, I don't think that the company has to necessarily be the concierge to the employees, because the employees really should be part of making it awesome and making it killer.
Oh,
and,
interesting.
and like let the employees create the workplace of the future. Here's some paint, here's a palette, go paint the wall the way you want to do it. And that's what we did, that's what you do in kindergarten, right? Every kid can see themselves on the wall of the place that they go to work. They see their picture, their artwork, it is their place. And I think there's a there for modern workplace that it can and should be created, and places can and should see themselves on the walls. So
Yeah, we talked about that in our group, but in terms of how do we allow employees to configure the way that they want? So the colors, the chairs, the wall patterns, that could change depending on mood, right, in the future.
I remember my early days at a large technology employer that was so strict that you couldn't even have fun employee profiles. like your system on your badge and on your online profile was this like strict headshot. It's like amazing how much things have changed. Like, would the company's stock have gone down if I was wearing a hat? Like, you know, it's amazing
So
that
how would
like,
the
things
group,
have changed.
building on you, Alan, how would the group advise executives on some of these discussions of letting go of control, is really what I'm hearing? What would you say to them?
It's, you know,
Let the inmates run this island?
it's not letting go
But
of control.
measure the KPIs that matter.
Yeah, it's
like,
not letting go of control.
The structure.
Like
that goes-
productivity is one KPI, right?
Yeah, measure the things that companies have serious things they have to worry about,
Yes.
compliance and security and auditability and legal requirements and things.
Revenue.
They don't have to worry about mind control over their employees. Like it's a very different environment than it was just a few years ago. And I guess people are learning that if you are too much structure, too strict, people are going to leave. People have choices now that they didn't used to have. And so command and control doesn't work anymore. You know, community does.
It's figuring out what they can be flexible about, like what really matters, and then letting the other things go. It can't be about every single thing.
If you
I
don't,
want to point out an example, right, through which I believe that's where the future lies. Here is an example of a founder called Mr. Bhushan Chandrakant. He owns a series of companies, and what he does is, to his employers, when they start working on a project, he lets his employee own a share of equity of the client. Now, the employee has equity on the from the client, which is why the ownership of the project is huge on the employee. So what I saw in their company was what you're talking about, collaboration and respect. That's completely different. It's the employee who's worried about the client. The employee is maintaining the client, and Bhushan is just managing the best talent for the client. So the kind of ownership that I saw, which is shifting, I think that's where the future lies. Measurement, work, respect, collaboration, it will all end up if the employee had shipped the product or not.
So if you look at the best companies in the world, this is one of the things that's always shocking when you look at big companies. They're trying to understand the market. They're trying to analyze how big is this thing. And I think that what you see is, you know, Google was a thesis project at Stanford, right?
Yep.
Facebook was a project in Mark Zuckerberg's dorm room. Apple was a hobbyist project at the Homebrew Computer Club and in Stephen Woz's garage. Before these things were companies, they were communities. Harvard, Stanford, Homebrew Computer Club, right? There were people that were passionate about something, and the company came much later, and then the market came way after that. And so we kind of have it backwards in terms of when we're thinking about innovation. And so for me, it's more about how do you create the environment that creates the community, that creates the culture, that potentially then can go and create those companies.
The answer to that question, if you don't have trust, if you're an executive or a CEO, you don't even trust the people you're working with, who cares about working remotely or the foosball table or the rock pool or whatever you're adding? Why are you even working with the people if you don't trust them? Like, you can't create greatness out of a lack of trust. And so that's where, on the contrast, people don't want to work for companies where they don't have trust or they're not empowered. And that's why they're exiting the workforce, because of those hierarchical structures.
Well, and that's why their products, a lot of big companies, their products suck. Because that's the environment that they're building them in they're not loving, amazing, beautiful environments. And so the stuff they put out is like not that good.
Back to the Places group, did you have some declarative statements or provocative questions to the group that we haven't covered?
Well, going on this kind of notion of remote working and whether or not companies should allow everybody to work remotely, one of our statements or questions to the group was, can you see a future without an office altogether? So is there an environment where everybody has to work remotely and use tools and technologies like ours to find their space as opposed to having one corporate location? And I'll just kick it off to say, I actually don't believe that I can see a future of no central offices. I think there are certain industries, certain technologies that need that brain power together in physical space. And I also think that there are people who thrive better in community organizations as opposed to distributed. And so I think there's a balance to recruiting the right people into a distributed organization, but also allowing for those people that might need more of that office structure.
I know I'm never going to go to the distributed dentist office. Have my teeth cleaned over there, my cavity filled 5 miles away. So I think it does depend on like where you are. But I'll sort of state that, first of all, it depends. But culture, values, people and teams need physical places. And I don't see a world where the norm for capacity and capabilities can be built on the fully distributed, never have your own place. Because one of the things we're talking about, or we sort of been tripping across, is like the best companies all in the world also have, they care a lot about their values. And their values are who they are and how they act. And like so much of that gets reinforced by people to people, what you see people do every day, what happens, and you know, that ideation you get across the water cooler. And so I think there's going to be an imperative 5-10 years from now, future work is going to have places.
Look at one interesting thing is terrorism. I mean, as like total counterpoint, like terrorism right now is like terrorists is more effective than they've ever been through a fully decentralized model without a lot of the communication that we're able to use, and that is sort of the modern threat of modern society. It's not like us against another country. It is sort of like bands of cyber terrorists, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I do think that we're going to see new models of distributed collaboration that we haven't seen. Like for instance, at our company, we're going the full non-office route. We have 3 houses, and we're just going to keep getting more houses as we keep getting more employees. And what's cool about that is they can kind of pop around to different spaces. They can work remotely. So we're still creating the culture, but we don't have to have an office. Like that's actually one of our corporate goals, is to like never have an office.
But it is a workspace. So it's home and office. You have a gym there. You have your own chef.
But it's different.
Yeah.
But it's different than an office.
I think the word office, the word office is kind of going away,
Yeah, I
but
think it's
space.
shifting the term office into this
Feels more like a home.
different,
But it's a place where your folks come together.
Yes.
Yeah.
As I
What
said
would you call
earlier,
it?
it's not one or the other.
Office.
We talked about it with technology as well. Everything doesn't have to replace the next. And this conversation doesn't have to be, will offices move to home?
Yeah.
In 6 hours today, I have a better relationship and understanding and feeling with all of you in this room that I built up over the last 6 weeks on social media and chat tools and emails and things. But I don't have to see you all tomorrow. For the next 6 weeks, I hope we keep the conversation going. But I hope 6 months from now I see you again. Like, so let's hope that the future is a blended version. Do I want to fight 2 hours of traffic every day to get to work? Absolutely not. I love the mornings where I just have to walk around the laundry pile and, you know, I'm at my desk. But it's not going to make physical go away. And I think we have to, you know, the future is going to be online tools, it's going to be physical things, it's going to be virtual reality things, it's going to be this blend, and they each have these wonderful benefits. So I think there is no argument that it's one or the other. I think it's which ratio and when and how effective.
Yeah, it's really coming up with this balance, and that's what we need to.
Yeah.
Speaking of balance, we have another question from the live stream. This is to anybody. When technology becomes a distraction in the office in meetings, how can the workplace help teams stay mentally present?
Close those laptop meetings during meetings. It's, you know, it's really funny when wearable computing started to get really popular. I joked around about, you know, there are places that implement, you know, screens closed during meetings, pay attention. And I was like, so you're going to have people take their watches off? Like now there's notifications on your watches. They're going to be, like when you go through security on the scanner at the airport and you have to put them in those little Tupperware things or something. We're going to have them as you go into meeting rooms. Take off all your wearable computing.
But maybe it's a sign that the meetings aren't a valid, productive,
Yes,
you know,
that's what I say.
if people are bored in meetings, why don't we change the meeting? I had this concept of changing it to a meetup, because people, you know, have been doing meetups and they're
Sounds more social.
yeah, it's like, why have a meeting and have a meetup and get people together, and it's not a strict agenda and all of this kind of
There's
stuff.
a really old Kevin Spacey movie, like this little cult thing before he was famous, called Sleeping with Sharks, where he's a movie producer. And there's a line in it, he says, any meeting that can start without me is a meeting not worth going to. I think that's just kind of brilliant. He's like, so there's no such thing as walking in late to a meeting. He's like, if I have to be there, or I'm not going to it. One of those two things.
But I do think the question could be more tailored toward natural distraction that we now have because we have devices in front of us. So as much as I want to pay attention sometimes, I get a vibration on my wrist, and I have to look at it, and then I get distracted by that. And even if I don't spend a lot of time on that device, my mental focus has now been shifted over to the device. And so I think there is a need for an education or some sort of a digital training to understand when it's appropriate to check those distractions versus
like the
not.
rules of engagement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there needs to be, there's definitely a need for people to be present in meetings, and there needs to be purpose behind it. You know, if I feel like sometimes there's this need to, okay, well, we need to have a meeting so we can just say that we're doing this, and then, okay, and then now, and every hour is booked with meeting to meeting to meeting, and it's just talking about this, either the same thing over and over again, or you're inviting too many people, and so then when does work actually happen? Right, and so that's, I think, part of this issue with balance is that
And
it's
one of
just too much of it.
Adobe's
It's like a-
research points was around public health and health in general, and I think this is why events like digital detoxing and switching off in the airplane mode have become so important. So let alone the focus in meetings, this is around switching off at night, switching off at home. It's your whole life. I think people aren't prepared to know how to let the technology not manage them and then manage the technology instead. So
and just getting the right tools in the office to work. I think that's the other.
A bit of advice I give people is interesting. I had an analytics company that I was testing a future product with around calendaring and scheduling. And so I gave them access, and they analyzed 3 years worth of my calendar data. And they were going to tell me who my most important clients are, which people I'm in meetings with most. The word that popped up the most often on my calendar was blocked. Because I go and I put blocks in various days, and sometimes it's before travel because I have to get to the airport, but sometimes it's because I have to get something done. So I had no idea. I thought it was amazing that it wasn't, you know, Microsoft or IBM or Google, like who I meet with most. Blocked is the company I work with the most often. So go forth and give yourself a few hours a day that nobody's allowed to talk to you. So.
And keep meetings short.
Yes.
You know, like if we're going to get interrupted every 10, 20, 30 minutes by some notification on a wearable, you know, if you're not going to fight it and close the laptop aloud, then just make it a 15-minute
Or in
meeting.
future-
Again, get buy-in at the beginning, like,
Yeah.
is everybody going to do this?
Or in future, let your bot talk to your team bot,
Yeah.
as you mentioned
Yes.
before.
You need a meeting with your
Well,
bot.
going back to the respect aspect, or you know, feeling appreciated when you're in a meeting and everyone's on their own device, there is this lack of respect, and there's, you know, I mean, like are people really paying attention to what needs to be done? Are we really kind of all going after the shared purpose? Yes, exactly.
Sorry, what? I wasn't listening.
Did you tweet it?
I was live streaming you.
Okay, nice.
There's another question here, the final question we have, and then I'll ask you for your final thoughts. This one's directed at you, Natalie, from Chasa. What factors are driving the design trends in the future workplace? And what are some of those trends? Maybe you could tie that back to your earlier observations about your kids creating their own worlds in Minecraft.
Yes. Yeah, actually, some of the things that we're really seeing right now, it's to create spaces that are deliberately experiential, really getting to what is that personal journey for each person during the day, going to more of a simply refined kind of look and feel, even whether it's lifestyle based or, you know, earlier I was saying how, you know, it's okay to grow up. You know, you don't have to look like a playground. You don't have to have bean bags. It's okay. And then, you know, another aspect is really about being socially conscious, and whether that's inviting the community in, giving back to really investing in local artists, local stores, and embracing, you know, especially as we do become more global and everything becomes flat, and there's a copy-paste culture with this Pinterest situation, that really embracing your local culture is desperately needed. And then the last aspect to that, I would say, is the holistic wellness, and really making sure that the spaces and the people are able to be holistically well.
Right, and we discussed that, like the Workplace Happiness Index is something that should emerge. And I don't think I've seen a study on that yet, have you?
No, no, not yet.
There are a lot of proxies for that
Right,
today, though,
yeah.
on employee engagement,
Satisfaction.
satisfaction,
Yeah.
drivers of happiness.
What are they, I mean, Yes, there's other ways to measure that too.
Yeah.
So, believe it or not, we have spent nearly 90 minutes talking about the future work, looking 5 to 10 years out, but we've all been together for the last 12 hours over dinner and this morning. I'd love to hear from each of you. What are the big insights or takeaways that you have gleaned from this? And let's go around the room.
Okay.
Matt, kick it off.
Okay. I kind of got to think about that.
We can come back to you.
Easy, you get to go first.
Yeah. We have to keep them pretty tight, so it doesn't have to be too long. So does anybody want to start?
I think, well,
quickly.
Okay,
One of
John.
the interesting things I heard from all of us and I learned is that the future of work on some levels isn't going to change that much. People want to be creative. People want to have impact. People want to do their best. People want to have fun. And the role in the future of work is going to be about how do we make more of that come to life at more scale. And that was a really consistent theme I heard around the room.
I think the power of employees versus employers will shift, with employees having more of an upper hand in the future. And so I think talent and HR organizations are going to have to really think about how they're going to evolve to approach that.
I think there is definitely a sense or a common thread of optimism amongst the group. Everyone is very hopeful for change and for what can happen. I think where it's going to be interesting to see is if as technology keeps kind of being introduced at such a rapid pace, if we can keep up with it in terms of the workspace in a much more fluid way.
And to add on to that, just the technology itself is already and will continue to enable us to work the way and the place where we do our best work. So as we build these tools, it'll help to facilitate our effectiveness.
Okay. We talked about tools. Let me imagine that this builds onto an economy. What if we don't have to work in future? What is that? What if that's the future of work? We don't have to work in work. It's just the passion we live, and we get paid for it.
Well, everyone's looking at me. Let me throw out, I'm going to break the rule. I'm going to do something just a little bit different. Instead of gleaning an insight, I'm going to throw out, a much further out future prediction. Let me end my part with something fun. We've talked about virtual reality and augmented reality and work at home and, face-to-face is better and things like that. A huge technology that's missing, and I think is something that's going to happen in 15, 20, 50 years, whatever it happens to be, is this ability to have tangible feedback on the things we do. The tools we use, you don't feel anything. So you're in a web conference, you can see people, and chat clients are better than email clients, and these things have gotten better, but we don't have that, pat you on the back type of feeling. And I was working with some research labs about what is great about face-to-face, and it's that human touch, and it's that human emotion and things, and somebody said, well, that's not possible. How could you do that through technology? And just 5 seconds of brainstorming, I said things like, well, what if your clothing had fibers in them that moved? And if in a meeting I high-fived you, your shoulder moved. There's a lot of really cool things about the future of work. I think there are some really amazing things that are going to happen over the next 10, 15, whatever amount of years. So for me, employees working together, being effective, getting their jobs done, meeting the right people, producing the right content, getting rewarded for it, we are so just at the bottom of the hill. And I'm just really optimistic about there's so much still to be done. And that's exciting for all of us, and I hope for everybody watching.
My jacket is buzzing right now.
Somebody called him at the perfect time. Thank you, I appreciate that. So,
Yeah, I would just say this discussion, we so easily kind of forget the past and sort of where we were 2, 3, 4 years ago. And I remember just having this discussion a few years ago, and this wasn't sort of common knowledge. There wasn't this much sort of agreement, and so there's this great William Gibson quote, which is the future is here, it just hasn't been distributed yet. And so I think the fact that we're all in alignment and we sort of agree on a lot of these different things, things are probably going to change pretty quickly. And I'm excited because enterprise software is needs to be updated, and there's
nothing but room for it.
Everything that happened in the consumer world is just now going to happen in the enterprise. So I think it's an exciting time. So thanks.
So last year, millennials took over as the largest cohort of the workforce, and I think that what excites me about the future of work is it's so unpredictable in a way. Like, technology is changing so quickly that we could be having this conversation in 2 years' time, and be in a completely different mindset or space. And that is what I think is really cool about it.
Well, I'd like to thank all of you, and I'd especially like to thank Adobe for hosting this think tank on the future of work. And that's a wrap. Thank you, everybody.
Well, thanks.
That was fun.